sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest thing in the world. Click, click, click. Sergeant Devon Mitchell didn't just apply the cuffs. He squeezed them until the metal bit into bone. He wanted a flinch. He wanted a sound. He didn't get one. The woman pressed against the hot hood of the silver Honda Civic didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just turned her head, rested her cheek against the searing metal, and watched him. Her eyes weren't wet, they were recording. 10 minutes ago, she was Judge Reina Washington on the way to a wedding in Birmingham with a trunk full of gifts and a playlist of Motown classics. Now, she was a statistic on the side of Highway 78. But to understand how a traffic stop turned into a federal war zone, you have to look at the predator before he caught his prey. 12:14 p.m. The heat in Fairfield, Alabama, was a physical weight. It pressed down on the asphalt until the horizon shimmered like a mirage. Sergeant Mitchell stood in the middle of the road, sweat staining the armpits of his uniform, mirrored eye widers reflecting the empty highway. He was bored, and a bored cop in a town this small is a dangerous thing. He saw the Honda rounding the bend, 10 years old, silver, reliable. The driver was a black woman, middle-aged, alone. Mitchell didn't see a person. He saw a nuisance tax. He saw lunch money. He raised a lazy hand. Pull over. Inside the Honda, Reina checked her dash. Speed, 45 and a 55. Seatbelt, locked. Registration, valid. She was a woman who lived by the code of federal statutes, and she drove the same way. But when she saw the blue lights, the law degree in her head went silent, and the survival instinct in her gut screamed. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Dust billowed. The engine cut. She kept her hands at 10 and 2, visible, non-threatening. Mitchell sauntered up to the window. He didn't lean down to eye level. He stood tall, forcing her to crank her neck up to look at him. He blocked the sun. The window rolled down. The AC escaped, replaced by the smell of hot tar and stale tobacco. Afternoon, Mitchell said. He was chewing gum, a slow, wet, rhythmic sound. Smack, smack. Good afternoon, officer, Reina said. Her voice was level. Is there a problem? Mitchell didn't answer. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were small, glassy, devoid of empathy. He let his gaze crawl over her, the floral dress, the lack of a wedding ring, the chaotic pile of wrapped gifts in the back seat. Where we run into in such a hurry, Mama? I'm traveling to a wedding in Birmingham. Birmingham, he repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. That's a long drive to be making, while you're breaking the law. Reina's fingers tightened on the wheel. Sir, I was driving 45. The limit is 55. Mitchell smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who held the keys to the cage. I got you at 65, swerving. And he leaned in, his face inches from hers. I don't see a seatbelt. It was a lie so bold, it was almost impressive. The belt was bright beige, against her dark blue dress. That is factually incorrect, Reina said. She didn't raise her voice. She used her courtroom tone, the one that made prosecutors check their paperwork. I am traveling at a safe speed. I am restrained. If your radar gun says otherwise, I'd like to see the calibration log. The silence that followed was heavy. The air grew static. Mitchell stopped chewing his gum. Calibration log, he whispered. He looked back at his deputy, a younger kid named Haynes, who looked like he was vibrating with caffeine. Mitchell laughed. You hear that, Hines? We got a lawyer. Mitchell turned back to Reina. The boredom was gone. Now, he was offended. Step out of the vehicle. I am under no legal obligation to exit my vehicle for a minor traffic citation unless... Bam! Mitchell didn't wait. He ripped the door open. The hinges groaned. He grabbed Reina's left arm, his fingers digging into the tricep, and yanked. She stumbled out, the heel of her shoe catching on the gravel. You don't lecture me on the law in my town, Mitchell hissed, spinning her around and slamming her against the car. You want to talk legal? Let's talk. Resisting arrest. Let's talk disorderly conduct. I am not resisting, Reina said, her face pressed against the glass of her own window. I am complying. Hines, toss the car, Mitchell barked. Officer, Reina said, her voice dropping an octave. You are making a mistake, a very expensive mistake. Mitchell leaned in close. He smelled of Old Spice and aggression. The only mistake, madam, was thinking you were special. He kicked her ankles apart. Spread 'em. Reina closed her eyes for 1 second. In the darkness of her mind, she saw her badge, It was in her purse, sitting on the passenger seat. All she had to do was say the words. Federal, district, judge. It would end instantly. Mitchell would pale. He would stutter. He would beg. But then she thought about the swerving. She thought about the lie. She thought about the arrogance of a man who felt comfortable assaulting a 52-year-old woman in broad daylight because he knew no one would stop him. If she stopped him now, he would just do it to someone else tomorrow. Someone who couldn't fight back. Reina opened her eyes. She swallowed the truth. She decided to let him hang himself. Cuff her, Mitchell said. Throw her in the back. We'll take her to the house. The deputy, Haynes, grabbed her purse and tossed it onto the hood of the cruiser. Then, feeling the need to perform for his boss, he kicked the door of Reina's Honda. The metal buckled. That's for the attitude, Haynes sneered. Reina watched the dent form. She cataloged the damage. She cataloged the faces. They shoved her into the back of the patrol car. The cage was cramped, smelling of vomit and disinfectant. As they pulled away, leaving her car abandoned on the shoulder, Mitchell caught her eyes. In the rearview mirror, "You're awfully quiet now," he taunted. "Where'd all those fancy words go?" Reina sat perfectly still. She wasn't quiet because she was afraid. She was quiet because she was building a case. They drove for 10 minutes. The radio chattered. The scenery shifted from highway to the dilapidated outskirts of Fairfield. When they arrived at the station, Mitchell didn't pull into the front lot. He steered the cruiser around the side, toward a heavy steel rolling door. "Why are we here?" Reina asked. It was the first thing she'd said in miles. Mitchell hit a button on his visor. The steel door rumbled open, revealing a dark concrete loading bay. "Front desk is busy," Mitchell lied, his grin widening in the reflection. "Besides, we like to bring our special guests in through the back. No cameras back here. Gives us a chance to clarify the rules before booking." No cameras. Reina's blood ran cold. She knew what that meant. She had sentenced men who had been processed in rooms like this. Broken ribs explained as falls. Swollen eyes explained as allergies. The cruiser rolled into the bay. The steel door rattled shut behind them, blocking out the sun. The darkness was total, save for the sickly yellow hum of a single overhead bulb. Mitchell cut the engine. The silence was suffocating. "Welcome to Fairfield," Mitchell said. Opening her door, he reached in, grabbed her by the handcuffs, and hauled her out. She stumbled, her knees hitting the concrete. Mitchell stood over her, unclipping his baton. He tapped it against his palm. Thwack, thwack. "Now," he whispered, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Let's see if we can't find that respect. You lost on the highway." Reina looked up at him. She looked at the baton. She looked at the shadows, where the cameras didn't reach, for the first time in 20 years. Judge Reina Washington wasn't sure if the law could save her. She wasn't a judge here. She was just a body in a dark room with 3 men who had nothing to lose. The question wasn't what they were going to do to her. The question was, would they survive what she was going to do to them? The metal door rattled in its frame. As the outside world was locked away, Deputy Haynes, the one with the nervous twitch and the heavy boot, leaned in close to Sergeant Devon Mitchell. He kept his voice low, but in the concrete echo chamber of the garage, he might as well have shouted. "Sarge," Haynes whispered, eyeing Reina like she was a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. "What are we writing this up as? We didn't actually catch her doing, well, anything." Mitchell didn't even look up from his clipboard. He was calm. The kind of calm that comes from years of unchecked power. "You're new, Haynes. So I'm going to pretend you didn't ask a stupid question," Mitchell drawled. "Speeding, failure to yield, resisting arrest without violence, disorderly conduct." He waved a hand, dismissive. "Throw in assault on an officer if she sneezes in your direction." "The charge doesn't matter," he said. "The night in the cage matters. We break the spirit, the DA can figure out the rest." Reina heard every word. She didn't blink. She cataloged the conspiracy. Under Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights. They dragged her into the booking area. Mitchell sat behind a scarred metal desk, tapping a cheap plastic pen against the surface. Tap, 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 a rhythm designed to annoy, to fray the nerves. "Name," Mitchell barked, not looking up. "Address. And who are we calling?" "To bail you out?" Reina stood perfectly still. Her wrists were burning under the cuffs, but her posture was straight as a steel beam. She said nothing. Mitchell stopped tapping. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. I said, "Name." Silence. Mitchell stood up so fast, his chair screeched against the linoleum. He slammed his palm onto the desk, the crack echoing like a gunshot through the bullpen. "You think you're cute?" he shouted, spit flying. "You think playing mute makes this go away? I have seen tough guys, gangbangers, and cartel runners break in this room. You are a middle-aged woman in a church dress. You will talk." Reina finally moved. Slowly, she tilted her head, locking eyes with him. "My name," she said, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated with authority, "is irrelevant to your misconduct. But for your paperwork, you can write down Jane Doe." Mitchell stared at her, a vein pulsing in his thick neck. Then, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Jane Doe," he chuckled. "Right, a smartass. You know, the smart ones always have the hardest time, in the holding cell." He signaled to Haynes. "Get her out of my sight. Put her in General Pop. Let the junkies welcome her to Fairfield." Hines grabbed Reina by the bicep and marched her down a hallway that smelled of urine and industrial bleach. He shoved her into a holding cell and slammed the bars shut, the lock engaged with a heavy final thud. Reina looked around. The cell was a concrete box, stained with the misery of 1,000 occupants. 2 other women were huddled on a metal bench in the corner. One was asleep, shivering, in a thin tank top. The other, a young woman with bruised eyes, looked up. "What did you do, Mama?" the girl asked, her voice rasping. Reina smoothed the front of her floral dress. "I drove a Honda Civic, while black," she said quietly. The girl let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Yeah, that's a felony, in this town." Reina didn't sit. She stood by the bars, watching. She was observing the ecosystem of the precinct. She saw officers joking as they logged confiscated cash that wouldn't make it to the evidence locker. She saw files being tossed into trash cans. She saw a system that wasn't just broken, it was predatory. An hour passed. Then, the heavy door at the end of the hall swung open. The atmosphere in the bullpen shifted. Instantly, the joking stopped. Deputies straightened their belts. Captain Jeremy Williams walked in. A man who wore his uniform differently. Crisp, tailored, precise. He wasn't like Mitchell. He wasn't a thug. He was a politician with a badge, which made him dangerous, in a completely different way. Williams scanned the room, his eyes landing on the booking desk, where Mitchell was nursing a coffee. Then, his gaze drifted to the holding cells. He stopped. When he saw Reina, he frowned. She didn't fit. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the room with a terrifying level of composure. "Mitchell," Williams called out. His voice was soft, but it cut through the noise. "Captain," Mitchell said, scrambling to stand up. "What is that woman doing in my holding cell?" Williams asked. He pointed a manicured finger at Reina. "She looks like she should be heading a PTA meeting, not sitting in a cage." Mitchell's smile was greasy. "Just a tourist, Cap, speeding. Got hostile during the stop, refused to ID. We're just letting her cool off before we process her." Williams narrowed his eyes. He walked slowly toward the cell. Stopping inches from the bars, he studied Reina. He looked at the quality of her dress, the intelligence in her eyes, the complete lack of fear. "Ma'am," Williams said, polite but probing. "My sergeant says you were hostile. You don't look hostile to me." Reina met his gaze. "Appearances can be deceiving, Captain. Your sergeant looks like a law enforcement officer, but we both know that's not true." The bullpen went deathly silent. Williams' face hardened. The polite mask slipped. He turned to Mitchell. "She's not a drunk," Williams murmured, "and she's not scared. I don't like it. She's lying about her name, Cap," Mitchell whispered. "She's hiding something." "Move her," Williams ordered, his voice cold. "Get her out of General Pop. Put her in interrogation room B, no cameras. I want to talk to her myself. If she's hiding something, I'll pull it out of her." Haynes scrambled to unlock the cell. "Let's go, Jane Doe." They marched Reina deeper into the station, past the offices, into a windowless room with a single metal table and a bolted-down chair. "Sit," Hines ordered, shoving her down. "Captain will be with you when he feels like it." He slammed the door. Reina was alone, with silence. She took a deep breath. She had seen enough. The entrapment was complete. The conspiracy included the sergeant, the arresting officers, and now the captain. She was just wondering how long it would take for her disappearance to trigger the failsafe. She had set up with her clerk. When the door flew open, it wasn't the captain, it was Hines. The deputy looked like he was about to vomit. His skin was pale, clammy. "Sarge!" Hines yelled into the hallway, his voice cracking. "Captain, you need to come out here now." Mitchell stomped into view, annoyed. "What is it, Hines? I'm trying to—" "Outside," Hines stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward the front entrance. "The lot. You need to see the lot." "If this is about the donut truck, I swear to God." Mitchell grumbled, pushing past him. Mitchell kicked open the front doors of the precinct and stepped out. Into the blinding Alabama sun, he froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The parking lot, usually empty on a Saturday, was full. 4 massive black SUVs, idling in a phalanx formation, blocking the exit. The grills flashed, with hidden red and blue strobes. Men in tactical windbreakers were already deployed, moving with military precision, securing the perimeter. But it wasn't the tactical gear that made Mitchell's knees turn to water. It was the license plates on the lead vehicle. They were U.S. government plates. A man in a dark suit stepped out of the lead SUV. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like the person who fired cops. He adjusted his tie, checked a file in his hand, and began walking toward the precinct steps with the terrifying momentum of a glacier. Haynes cowered behind Mitchell. "Sarge, who are they?" Mitchell watched the agents swarm his station. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. "That's not just the feds, Haynes," Mitchell whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "That's the Department of Justice." The lead SUV door opened, and a man stepped out. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like a shark in a 3-piece suit. This was Marcus Sterling, the United States Attorney for the district. He didn't walk. He advanced. Behind him, a dozen federal agents in windbreakers fanned out. Securing the perimeter, with rifles at the low ready, Mitchell's face went the color of wet ash. Beside him, Captain Jeremy Williams stood frozen, realizing too late that the situation he'd been ignoring was about to bury him. Sterling pushed through the precinct doors. The air conditioning seemed to die instantly. The silence in the bullpen was absolute. Every phone stopped ringing. Every deputy stopped typing. "Sergeant Mitchell," Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly calm. "Care to explain what kind of operation you're running here?" Mitchell's mouth opened and closed, like a fish on a dock. "Nothing, sir. Just standard police work. Routine traffic stop." "Routine," Sterling repeated, tasting the lie. He walked to the booking desk, picked up the file Mitchell had forged, and flipped it open. He scanned the charges: resisting, disorderly, Jane Doe. A deep line appeared between Sterling's eyes. He dropped the file onto the metal desk. Slap. "Where is she?" "Just a non-compliant traveler, sir," Mitchell stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Refused to ID. We have her in interrogation B." "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" Sterling didn't wait for an answer. He marched down the hallway, his dress shoes clicking sharply on the linoleum. Mitchell and Captain Williams scrambled to follow, looking like children being called to the principal's office for expulsion. Sterling threw open the door to interrogation room B. Reina Washington was sitting at the metal table, hands still cuffed. She looked up. She didn't look relieved. She looked like a woman who had just finished gathering all the evidence she needed. "Ma'am," Sterling said, his voice softening instantly. "I apologize for the delay." Mitchell squeezed into the doorway, desperate to control the narrative. "Sir, if she's a friend of yours, we can work this out," but she refused to give a name. Sterling spun around. "Shut up." He turned back to the woman in the chair. "For the record, and for the benefit of these officers, could you please state your full name and title?" Reina stood up. The handcuffs clinked, but she wore them like jewelry. She looked Mitchell dead in the eye. "I am the Honorable Reina Washington," she said, her voice filling the small room. "Federal District Judge for the Northern District of Alabama." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. Mitchell felt the floor tilt, his vision blurred. The nobody in the Honda Civic, the auntie he had manhandled, the woman whose car his deputy had kicked. She wasn't a victim. She was one of the highest-ranking judicial officers in the state. She was the person who signed the warrants he begged for. Captain Jeremy Williams let out a strangled noise. He looked at Mitchell with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You arrested a federal judge?" Williams whispered, his voice cracking. "You put a federal judge in a cage?" I didn't know," Mitchell wheezed. "She didn't say. I didn't have to," Reina cut in, her tone razor-sharp. "The Constitution doesn't require me to flash a badge to be treated with basic human dignity. You assaulted me because you thought I was powerless. You were wrong." Sterling nodded to the agents behind him. "Get the cuffs off her, now." As the steel bands were unlocked, Reina rubbed her wrists. She didn't look at the bruises. She looked at Mitchell. "Sergeant Mitchell," she announced, delivering her verdict, without a gavel. "Your career in law enforcement is over. You are under arrest for deprivation of rights, under color of law, false imprisonment, and assault on a federal officer." Mitchell backed away. He hit the wall, cornered, done. But then, a flicker of desperate cunning lit up his eyes. He reached into his back pocket, his hands shaking so hard, he almost dropped the folded piece of paper he retrieved. "Wait," Mitchell said, a manic grin stretching across his face. "Wait just a damn minute, Your Honor." He slammed the paper onto the table. "You can arrest me," Mitchell laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. "But you can't touch my money. That right there, that's my retirement paperwork. Filed it 3 days ago, approved and stamped." He looked at Reina, smugness warring with panic. "I'm technically a civilian as of this week. I'm retired. My pension is locked. You can send me to jail, but I'll be sitting on a beach in Florida the second I get out, living on the taxpayer's dime." Reina picked up the paper. She read it. Then she handed it to Captain Williams. "Captain," she said coolly, "verify the effective date." Williams rushed to the computer terminal in the corner. He typed furiously, desperate to be useful, desperate to be on the winning side. The screen flickered. Williams looked up. He didn't look at Mitchell. He looked at the floor. "It's valid," Williams said. Mitchell pumped his fist. "Ha! See, you can't touch it!" "But," Williams continued, "the effective date is next Monday." Mitchell froze. "You're still on the active duty roster, Sergeant," Williams said, his voice flat. "You were an active duty officer when you committed these felonies. Under federal statute, conviction results in immediate and total forfeiture of all benefits." Reina stepped closer to Mitchell. "No beach in Florida, Sergeant. Your new address will be a 6x8 cell, very similar to the one you forced me into. And you won't have a dime to buy commissary." Mitchell slumped. The fight left him. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a small, terrified man in a uniform he had disgraced. 2 federal agents moved in, grabbing his arms. This time, there was no gentle procedure. They slammed him against the wall, wrenching his arms behind his back. Click, click, click. The sound of the cuffs was poetic. "Get him out of here," Sterling ordered. "Wait," Mitchell screamed, thrashing against the agents. "Wait." He wasn't begging for mercy. He was looking around the room, his eyes wild, landing on Captain Williams, then on the deputies huddled in the hallway. If he was going down, he wasn't going alone. "You think this was just me?" Mitchell yelled, spit flying. "You think I came up with the Fairfield tax by myself?" He twisted his head, locking eyes with Captain Williams. "He knew," Mitchell shrieked, pointing his chin at the captain. "And Deputy Haynes? He's the one who doctors the dashcam footage. We've been doing this for 5 years. Half this department is on the take." The blood drained from Captain Williams' face. In the hallway, deputies started backing away, looking for exits. That didn't exist. Reina Washington exchanged a look with the U.S. attorney. "It seems," Reina said, "that we're gonna need a lot more handcuffs." Outside, the first news helicopter was already circling overhead. The roar of the rotors grew louder, drowning out the protests of the corrupt officers inside. The world was watching, and the purge of the Fairfield Police Department had just begun. But the true scale of the rot was just about to be revealed. Another fleet of black SUVs tore into the parking lot, tires screeching on the asphalt. This wasn't the backup. This was the FBI. Special Agent in Charge Davis stepped out of the lead vehicle. He didn't look at the chaos. He looked at the building like he was deciding the best way to demolish it. He walked straight to U.S. Attorney Marcus Sterling and Judge Reina Washington, stepping over the threshold where Reina had been dragged in handcuffs just hours before. "Marcus," Davis said, nodding to the prosecutor. He turned to Reina. "Your Honor, we secured the perimeter. But I need to know the blast radius. How bad is this?" Reina looked at Mitchell, being shoved into a federal transport van, still yelling about how he didn't do it alone. "Agent Davis," Reina said, her voice low and dangerous. "If you only dig here, you'll miss the roots." Mitchell was too comfortable. "You don't act with that kind of impunity unless you know the people above you are dirty, too." Before Davis could answer, a hand extended from the group of terrified local officers. It was Captain Jeremy Williams. His face was pale, the look of a man who knew the ship was sinking and decided to grab the only life raft left. He was holding a thick, expanding file folder. "Captain?" Sterling asked, eyeing the file. "It's not just the sergeant," Williams whispered, his voice trembling. He shoved the file into Reina's hands, refusing to look her in the eye. "If I give you this, I want immunity." Reina opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents. Memo after memo, courtesy cards issued to donors, emails from the county sheriff demanding KWOTUs, text messages from the district attorney's office asking to lose evidence. In brutality cases, it wasn't a rogue precinct. It was a criminal enterprise, disguised as a justice system. Reina looked up. She slammed the file shut. "Agent Davis, this goes all the way to the county seat. We're gonna need a bigger task force." Davis wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He realized his weekend was over. His year was over. "All right," Davis said, turning to his team. "Lock it down. Nobody leaves, with so much as a paperclip. I want every hard drive, every body cam server, and every phone." The U.S. attorney stepped out. Onto the precinct steps, by now, the local affiliates. Fox 6, NBC 13, had set up a wall of cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "Effective immediately, the Department of Justice is forming a federal task force to investigate civil rights violations throughout Jefferson County. We are not just looking at this station. We are looking at the sheriff. We are looking at the DA. And if you wore a badge to break the law, we are coming for you." The shockwave hit the state capitol like a bomb. Over the next 7 days, the blue wall of silence didn't just crack, it crumbled. The governor of Alabama, realizing the political toxicity of the situation, issued a statement ordering total cooperation, effectively throwing the local good old boys to the wolves. The following Tuesday, the residents of Jefferson County woke up to a sight they never thought they'd see. It wasn't a drug raid. It was a corruption sweep. FBI agents kicked down doors in affluent subdivisions. They marched the county sheriff out of his office in handcuffs, his head ducked under a jacket. They raided the DA's file room. In total, 32 officers, 8 deputies, 2 assistant prosecutors, and the sheriff himself were indicted on federal RICO charges. The fear that had silenced the community for decades evaporated. Once people realized the monster was in a cage, they started to talk. Hotlines rang off the hook. Stories of false arrests, planted evidence, and roadside shakedowns poured in. Reina Washington hadn't just won a lawsuit. She had performed an exorcism on the entire county. 2 months later, the wedding of Reina's niece finally took place in a sun-drenched chapel in Birmingham. It had been delayed by the investigation, but nobody minded. When Reina walked into the reception hall, the music didn't stop. But the room changed. People didn't just see an aunt or a judge. They saw the woman who had walked into the fire and dragged the truth out with her bare hands. There were hugs, there were tears. But for Reina, the real victory was quieter. She sat at a corner table, watching her niece dance. She thought about the cell. She thought about the smell of the holding cage. She thought about how easily she could have just paid the ticket, flashed her badge earlier, and driven away. She thought about the people who couldn't flash a badge. Monday morning, Judge Washington was back in her chambers. The federal courthouse was buzzing, but her office was quiet. On the wall, she had hung a new frame. It wasn't a diploma or an award. It was the front page of the Birmingham News. Judge exposes decades of corruption, 30 officials indicted. She stared at the headline, sipping her coffee. She had learned a lesson. That wasn't in any law book. She learned that sometimes the only way to test the strength of the system is to let it try, to break you. She set her cup down and put on her robe. It felt heavier now, not like a burden, like armor. There was a knock at the door. "All rise," her clerk called out. From the courtroom, Reina walked toward the door. She was ready, because she knew that somewhere out there, on a lonely stretch of highway, another Mitchell was watching and waiting, and next time, she would be ready for him, too. They say justice is blind, but as Judge Washington proved, sometimes justice needs to open its eyes, get out of the car, and fight, because the verdict is in. But the story never really ends.